Call to order Lawrence Common Council meeting. The date is June 14th, 2023. The time is 6:32. Pledge of Allegiance and prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sean, can you do the prayer, please? Sure.
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together today and keeping us safe. Let the truth come out today and from everybody's mouth, and let us be aware of our surroundings and what we're doing. And remember that we're here and focused on the citizens of our city and beginning and doing well for their welfare. Amen.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Also would like to move to signing of the vouchers and approval of claims.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion that's been moved and seconded. We'll call for a, we don't have to do a roll call vote. Okay, perfect. So all in favor, show by show of hands. Any opposed? See none? All right. Next, we want to move to our preliminary. We have a special report tonight. We're going to get right into it and move into the preliminary report. I also want to ask councilors to hold all questions until the end. It's a lot of material to get through. Thank you. Mr. Hughes, welcome back.
President Giles, members of the council, it's good to be back. It's been a while since I've been before you. Some of you I just met for the first time tonight, but many of you I've seen before, and it's good to be back in front of you. For those who don't know me, my name is John Hughes, and I'm an attorney at the law firm of Bose, McKinney & Evans. I'm Chris Wheeler's partner, and we're here tonight to provide you with an update on what we found so far in terms of an investigation. I'm going to share my screen so that those who are seated in the audience can also see the presentation up here. And give me just a minute so I can make sure I share the audio correctly. Okay. Hopefully the audio is sharing. If not, I will fix that in a moment. Again, my name is John Hughes, and we have been asked by the president to provide you with a preliminary report. I want to be careful to tell you this is preliminary in nature. We believe additional investigation is needed. In particular, from financial folks, it would be good to get some additional review of the finances from 2021 and 2022. What I'm going to provide to you tonight is my best attempt to show you what we've learned so far based on showing you documents and showing you statements out of depositions. I will provide you with sort of our analysis of what that means and where we think the facts tend to lead, but this is really just intended to provide you with the evidence that has been found so far. So what is this really all about? I think this chart sums up why we're here. We're here because in 2022, the council adopted a budget ordinance. That budget ordinance put a total budget at $26.374 million between the general fund, the stormwater, and the admin services fund. However, that budget was not submitted to the DLGF. And as a result of that budget not being submitted to the DLGF, the budget reverted, resulting in the numbers you see here. $29.7 million coming to the mayor and the administration and the city. That's a difference of almost $3.5 million. The questions that we were asked to determine were, what happened, who was involved, and what are the consequences? As we're looking at that, we're also trying to see, was something done wrong? Was this done by accident? Was it happenstance? And that's what we've tried to focus on in this investigation, is learning what happened and understanding the facts the best we can. So far, these are our three summary findings that I intend to propose and show to you tonight. The evidence that we're going to present to you and the evidence that's presented to us shows that the Collier administration worked together to revert the 2022 budget. That's how. Why did it revert? Because the controller failed to submit the council-approved budget to the DLGF. What are the consequences? As a result of that reversion, money had to be moved between departments and accounts, and it was done so without any appropriation. These are the 3 findings that we found so far, and we'll walk you through them tonight. I want to start with what I would say is perhaps the beginning. In September of 2021, you were introduced with a budget. This is an excerpt from that budget. The excerpt includes a statement from your controller, Tyler Douthit, right at the beginning, that says, "I'm proposing to you a balanced budget." Those are his words, not mine. What is a balanced budget? At the bottom, you'll see an excerpt also out of that budget proposal. And when I'm talking about this budget proposal, what I'm talking about is what we often refer to as the budget book, the document that you receive that the administration puts together that is their proposal on the budget. That budget book said a balanced budget is when anticipated revenues equal anticipated expenditures. I asked Tyler in his deposition if that was true. Was it a balanced budget? Back up. Was your 2022 budget proposal, did it propose a balanced budget?
Balanced in the sense that incoming expected receipts matched the expenditures, then no.
It was not a balanced budget. I'm going to apologize about the audio. It's matching your screen up here. This one's moving a little ahead of it, but it's just because of the technology. So I apologize for that. It was not a balanced budget. Now, I'll tell you in his deposition, Tyler did right after this make a statement that I did balance the budget, but I balanced it using cash on hand. He used what we often refer to as the operating reserve. That is not the definition of balanced budget that you were told as a council when the budget was presented to you that you were receiving. You were told you were receiving a budget which was balanced on their definition of expenditures matching your receipts. That was not the case. Tyler knows that now, but perhaps what's more concerning is he knew it then. In August of 2021, before the budget was presented, we have this email. This is an email from Tyler Douthit to Bob Swintz. We received a number of emails from the administration when we requested emails about the budget, but we didn't receive them all. And so we had to go ask some of your consultants, and Bob Swintz is your financial advisor, and these are some of the documents that he's provided to us. Although the controller was telling this body that it was a balanced budget and fiscally responsible, almost a month before he presented that budget to you, here's what he said about his budget in yellow. "I'm planning on spending down a portion of our general fund operating reserve balance, but want to be sure that this isn't excessive." He was concerned that his own proposal might be seen as excessive before he ever gave it to you. Another concern that we had about the budget when we were looking at it, and this will come out in additional emails later, is the other lines. I know this is kind of tiny on the screen to see, but at the bottom of the screen, you'll see out of the general fund mayor's office, just an excerpt of what the professional services line looks like. You have 431.001 legal, 002 engineering, 003 financial consulting, 004 general consulting, and then you have 010 other. And you have these throughout your budget. There's all places where it says 010 other. From reading the budget, you can't know what that other line is for. There's no way you can tell what it's for. But I can tell you in deposition testimony, I learned from the deputy controller or the assistant controller, Humphrey Nagila, that this particular line item that's highlighted there is effectively the salary of Dan Zerner, the city's economic development director. Now, he's a contract employee. He's a 1099 employee. He's not paid a salary. He's paid on contract, so I'm not saying having the services is inappropriate, but there's no way in your budget book you could know that that's paying Mr. Zerner's services. And that's important because Mr. Nagila told me based on the other cuts that you made that it would be devastating to the city. When I said, well, what do you mean devastating? He said, well, Mr. Zerner, our economic development director, would have had to lose his job. So I don't know. I would consider a budget that shows that really being transparent and open when you're told it's balanced and it's not, and there's all these other lines that aren't described. In September of 2021, we have what I would consider the beginning of the discussion about budget reversion. What you have there in front of you is an email that Mr. Douthit sent to the DLGF. The DLGF is the Department of Local Government and Finance, and he's asking, at the time the budget is introduced, just 10 days after you've seen it, what happens if we revert? What happens if our budget reverts? Now, not let's work together with the council and figure out a way to get a budget together, but what happens if it reverts? And here's his question. Does it just go to the additional appropriations from the appropriations from 2021, or do I get the additional appropriations too? What that question is it just the 2021 budget, or do we get all this other money that we've included? Sorry, went backwards there. Okay. Meanwhile, there's conversations going on between Mr. Douthit and Mr. Swentz. Here's what they thought would happen if the council touched the budget. You want to touch the budget, that's your prerogative, but Bob Swentz says, you'll screw it up. Love to hear your recommendations, you'll screw it up. That's the city's financial consultant. That's what they think about how this council operates. Tyler responds, I'll have the same response as Jason. Now, Mr. Swentz talked about Jason's response up there, Jason being Jason Fenwick. If they want to cut the budget, they'll have to make the cut because I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do. Administration doesn't want to work with the council on cuts that you think are appropriate. They've given you a budget, adopt our budget. If you're going to do it on your own, don't worry, they'll screw it up. Around that same time, this is 3 days after those emails are sent, the council begins to have meetings about the budget, and there's questions of the controller. I didn't put this whole video on here because it's lengthy, but it's clear from that conversation that the administration's perspective, at least as presented by the controller, is we don't want to come back to you for additional appropriations next year. Yes, we're spending $3.6 million in reserves to balance our budget, but we don't want to come back for additional appropriations. There may be administrative reasons why that's the case, but that was the position the council wanted to do, which was we'll do one-time expenditures, just come back to us in the future, but it's clear that the administration did not want to do that. So meanwhile, Tyler and Bob continue, Tyler Douthit and Bob Swentz, now Jason Fenwick's included, continue to have conversations about the budget over email. And Bob says this, I don't know if you win the balanced budget argument. Yeah, because it's not a balanced budget, so you don't win that argument. I'm not sure logic matters at this point, but I would let them decide what to cut. I wasn't clear if we could identify the expenditures for the $3.6 million or not. So not only do they think they're going to screw up, but logic apparently won't persuade you. And Mr. Swentz, the city's financial advisor, isn't even for sure if you can identify what that $3.6 million is going to be spent on. He doesn't know. So they begin to discuss how do we address these $3.6 million? And here's what they say in emails. Bob says to Tyler, after Tyler identifies some expenditures he could put into 3.6, he says, I think that's good, not because that's what you're spending it on. No, listen to this. I think that's good because I could argue those are not capital, therefore not in the capital budget, but they're maintenance type items and therefore could be reasonably included in a professional service type budget. Well, maybe the playground equipment is capital, but within the total capital budget now. I'm going to show you what the expenditures are in just a minute, and I'm going to ask you, are these capital expenditures or are these services? Okay? But the point is, they know that they're identifying $3.6 million. Bob knows that they're just identifying what they can to give you something. And then what does Bob say? The revise is just cleaner language, no number change. I'm sure they'll find something to bitch about. And excuse my language tonight, but I'm just going to read the emails as they come out. I'm sure they, meaning this council, will find something to bitch about. Tyler responds to that, and he says, I agree. I'm expecting them to question the amounts from each of those departments. I've got a somewhat vague answer ready for those, and I assume he means I've got a somewhat vague answer ready for those. Before you even ask the question, when they ask a question, I've got a vague enough answer. I'll just give him a somewhat vague answer. Here's the $3.6 million that Tyler identified for you, that he's got a somewhat vague answer on. Community park parking lots, trail expansions, pickleball expansions, park playground equipment, government center remodeling. I did skip over park signage. I suppose you could argue signage is the purchase of equipment. You're buying the sign. It could be a service because you're installing existing signs, but I think the remainder are public works, in my opinion. Here's the real problem, though. $3.6 million, almost all of it identified in parks projects. This is what the total park budget was in your proposed budget. And you guys know this. This is why you asked the question. The total budget was $1.5 million. I didn't even break it down by expenditures. Let's just assume every expenditure is in the parks. So we know the $3.6 million isn't in the parks, so where is it? Where is it? That's exactly what you asked him, and I'm sure you'll remember this meeting. Those of you who were at the Finance Committee meeting in October of 2021 at the beginning of the year, that was essentially your question. Where is it? Where is it? Not sure if this video is going to play or not.
So you can't answer the question as to where any of these projects are funded in the parks budget.
That's not what I'm saying, but if that's what you want to take from it, then you can take that.
So answer the question. Can you tell us where it is? It's really a yes or no question. Either you can or you can't, or you just refuse to.
Refuses to.
We'll go with refuse then.
We'll go with refuse then. Sorry, just a second. So can you tell me in this proposed, so I asked him in his deposition, you refused to answer then, can you answer now? So can you tell me in this proposed budget book where each of those expenditures are on Exhibit 17?
At this point, no. This is so far removed from where we ended up that I'd have to go back through in detail to pull all those.
So you can't tell me today.
No.
And it's true that you wouldn't tell the council when they ask, correct? You refuse to answer that question.
That's correct.
Okay. Refused to answer your question before, can't now. So I asked the mayor.
$6 million in OR capital projects.
Sorry, that's not me. That's Mr. Bosma, who's here tonight. Mr. Bosma asked the mayor if he knew if that $3.6 million was in the budget.
$6 million in OR capital projects. You indicated that those were not.
If our audio is going to catch up or not. The technical difficulties. Mr. Bosma asked the mayor, you indicated during your deposition when I was asking him that there were capital expenditures that were not in the budget. Did you know that for a fact? That was the question that he asked him.
$6 million in OR capital projects. You indicated that those were not appropriated in the 2021 budget. Do you know that for a fact?
Yes.
Yes. Now, Mr. Bosma then asked the mayor, well, should we trust your testimony or Mr. Douthat's on that point? And he said, Mr. Douthat's. The mayor doesn't think they're actually in the budget. He says he knew for a fact they weren't there, but then he says, but trust Mr. Douthat. And Mr. Douthat tells us, I can't tell you where they are. I refused to before, and I can't now. Now, he says I'd have to go through these and pull them out line by line and figure them out. He was aware of the date of his deposition. He knew what we were gonna ask on this topic, and they chose not to. Mayor's testimony, however, is consistent with what Bob Swintz put in an email. Mr. Humphrey had meetings with Mr. Denny about the $3.6 million. It is clear from Mr. Humphrey's testimony and also what Mr. Denny has shared that there were conversations about $3.6 million. Where was the $3.6 million? I called it on this slide creative accounting because that's what I think it is, but I want to be clear, those are my words. I'm not making a conclusion. That's just my argument as counsel that I think it was creative accounting. And here's what Bob says. He does, meaning he does, Mr. Denny, he does understand that the $3.6 million that have been identified were not actually in the budget, at least in a single line item. Not in there. They're spread throughout the budget because there was $3.6 million in operating reserve that was expended, and when you said, what are you spending it on, they identified projects. It wasn't the other way around. It wasn't, we need this money to buy these projects. It was, we're balancing the budget with cash. Oh, now we have to advise the council something, let's go find some projects. Because we can't get a straight answer from the administration on where that $3.6 million is, and because we're told it's all over the budget, the council did what it should do and cut money from all over the budget to get to $3.6 million. This document's difficult to read. This is an excerpt of the chart from the initial budget cut that you made. You cut $3.6 million in your initial proposal. Now, it was just a proposal. It might have received a first reading. I don't think it received any kind of second reading. It received additional review, but that's what you were trying to do. You were trying to cut the $3.6 million because you didn't want to spend one-time costs to balance your budget. You wanted to spend what you were going to get in accepted receipts. If you got more, you'd make an additional appropriation. If you got less, but you still wanted to do these one-time projects and money was sufficient to do the budget, you'd accept an additional appropriation for those reserves. That's what you were trying to accomplish. After you introduce that budget, here's what happens. City Attorney, Mrs. Glazer, she just got married, congratulations to her, emails Bob Swentz. Actually, this is a more complicated email chain how it started. It actually started with an email to Mr. Douthit where the city attorney said, our Taft contacts tell me that DLGF informed them that if you wait until the end to adopt the budget and then the mayor vetoes it after the November 2nd deadline, the budget reverts. Our Taft contacts told us that. We should ask the DLGF if that's true to get some confirmation from them. And so Tyler reaches out and Mr. Douthit learns from the DLGF that that's not true, that there's actually this 30-day window where you can override that veto. So the statute is, if the budget is vetoed after the deadline, you still have 30 days to override the veto. That's the statute. And so DLGF advises of that. And then there's this conversation between Bob and the city attorney where she says that. The DLGF rep had told Taft that at the end of the month, if it was vetoed, that would preclude the ability to override without 48 hours notice of a council meeting before November 1st. This would result in no budget being adopted and reversion to last year's budget. Okay, now, clearly they're discussing reversion just after you introduced a budget. The first time you introduced any proposal, they're immediately talking about how do we revert this thing. And here's what Bob says. Yeah, the mayor, Jason, and I actually talked about this scenario last week in French Lick, and he says, I found the statute and told him it wasn't going to be an option. Ask the mayor about his meeting in French Lick. Did you talk to Jason and Bob when you were in French Lick about the budget?
Yes.
Okay, what conversations did you have?
That conversation was primarily about how Tyler had handled his introduction to the council.
We're losing some audio there again. That conversation was primarily about how Tyler handled his introduction to the council. And then the mayor says, did budget reversion? We're losing the audio. I'm sorry, guys. The mayor said that he's asked, I said, did that include a discussion about budget reversion? Didn't come up as a topic during that? Okay. Did Bob Swentz tell you you can or can't revert a budget by vetoing it?
Bob Swentz and I, to my knowledge, never had a conversation about reversion.
Somebody's not telling us the truth. Now, I did present the mayor with these emails, and I asked him, Mayor, there says there's a conversation about reversion. And I'll show you that a little bit later, but the mayor's response to that I want you to pay attention to as well. So, meanwhile, while the Bob, Jason, and the mayor are talking about reversion and French Lick, according to Bob. According to the mayor, they were not. So somebody's telling us in deposition or in emails what happened. You can make that conclusion. Meanwhile, the controller is actually trying to figure out a way to absorb these cuts. He says, the council's cuts are dramatic. I'm confident we can still salvage our 2022 budget. The controller says, Mayor, I've looked at this budget. I'm still confident we can salvage this even with the mayor's cut, even with the cuts. And I asked him about this in his deposition. He said, I think I have that quote here in just a little bit, and you'll see what he says. Meanwhile, Mr. Swintz sent at least 3 options on your first budget proposal saying, here's some ways that you could move this money or figure out how to do this. And he said, he also said this, here was one of his proposals. I'm sure they, meaning the council, would come up with some legal reason why you can't, but here's a scenario where you zero out the council budget and then reallocate. I can't all the credit for this scenario, and I think he means I can't take all the credit. Don't know who the credit belongs to, but that was one of his options. The mayor responded to that proposal. Bob, I love zeroing out the council budget scenario. I'll tell you, in his deposition, the mayor told me they were joking between them. He said it was a joke from Bob, and Bob understood my joke back. But he also says, I'd be most remiss without thanking you for your time yesterday. You went above and beyond. I owe you at least one fine dinner, so I'll expect you and Jason to pick a place and let's get it done.
Up getting a meeting with him that day.
All right. Then you said, although the council's cuts are dramatic, I'm confident we can still salvage our 2022 budget. What does that mean?
At that point in time, with the general fund budget being cut down, I still felt comfortable that if we cleaned up the line items, we would live with the balanced budget. I was totally fine with the $24.1 million budget.
So you thought you could make it work, correct?
Well, I thought if we had conversations with the council to clean up the line item cuts and where they were, I felt pretty comfortable that the city as a whole could operate with a $24.1 million general fund budget.
Okay.
I'm going to guess for those who haven't either read the deposition testimony or were sitting there, this is probably news to you. Controller said if I can meet with the council and clean up the budget cuts, I can make it work. I can live with the number they've given us. That wasn't communicated to the council in 2021. Instead, what was communicated is councilors don't work with Mr. Douthit anymore, work with Mr. Nagila. And Sean and Humphrey need to get together, Councilor Denny and Mr. Nagila need to get together to figure out what to do with this budget. Although that was the conversation that was happening here, there was a conversation happening behind the scenes between Mr. Swintz, and I told you he ran 3 different scenarios. He tried to identify exactly what everything could be used for, where we could find cuts, and here's what I think is most interesting about this email. I suspect that you will not spend this much in personal services, and what he's talking about is how much you budgeted. Why? Because I would think there are unfilled positions or positions that were not filled all year. Now, that was the council's intent, as I understand it. Your intent was to fully fund all the filled positions, to cut funding from the unfilled positions and the ones that the council did not think needed to be filled. I want us to put all of us, anyone who's listening and the council here, put ourselves back in 2021. We've just come out of the worst year and a half of all of our lives, just came out of a major pandemic. All of us are sick and tired of being at home all the time. We're also financially stretched, emotionally stretched, physically stretched. Some of us have lost loved ones, and this council said, we're concerned. Now, there's reason to be concerned. The way property taxes work in the state of Indiana is it's assessed one year, paid the next. We don't know the people who are going to pay property taxes next year if they can make ends meet. We don't know if we're going to have the collections that we thought we were going to have. Now, thankfully, things have been okay in Indiana for the most part. But in 2021, when you're adopting a budget, you didn't know. And so you said, let's tighten our belts. Let's not hire new people. Let's not fill positions. This council would like you to work with the budget you have. And we'll use American Rescue Plan funds, which is exactly what they were for, to help out where we can. That was what the council's proposal was. And as Bob said, the actual projection may have been less, and he'd be interested to know what that was, as would this council. And here's what I thought was interesting. It was hard for him to tell what the remaining $1.1 million in cuts were, as a number of the items were other. For us too. It's difficult to know what those are. Meanwhile, right around the same time, while Mr. Douthat's trying to work on ways to figure out if they can absorb the budget cut, he goes back again and asks, if we miss the deadline, do we revert back to the previous adopted budget, or do we revert to the adopted budget plus additional appropriations? There's also that conversation in here in this email I told you about where the city attorney asked Tyler Douthat to reach out to the DLGF and ask this first question about the veto. I've already addressed that issue, so I didn't highlight it on this email, but that was part of his question. His other question was, again, I've asked you before, but do I get all the money that we had in 2021, or do I get also the money we got through additional appropriations? And keep in mind, again, this is a full month, not quite a full month, but you still have almost a month to adopt the budget during this time. We could work together. We could figure something out. We could sit down and say, the council wants to cut $3.6 million. We're willing not to spend our operating reserve, or let's work together. Let's meet in the middle. But there was none of that going on. I do want to acknowledge that the controller did apologize to the then president of the council for his behavior in the budget or in the conversation about refusing to work together. He did apologize, and the president at the time did accept that apology, indicated he wants to work together for the benefit of the administration, the city, and the council. And interestingly, I received this email chain from Mr. Swentz, and I wasn't really for sure why, but in the email the mayor said, thought you two might enjoy this. Not exactly sure what he means by that, but I found it unusual that instead of saying, looks like we're working together, he says, thought you might enjoy that she's saying she wants to work together. I saw it, frankly, as a little demeaning. Maybe that's not the way the mayor meant it, but I'm bringing it to your attention for that purpose. And again, I couldn't ask the mayor about this because that email wasn't provided to me, and what we asked the mayor for, it was given to me by Mr. Swentz, which those documents came afterwards. This email really bothers me. I'll be real honest with you. This is an email that I also received from Mr. Swentz and didn't receive from Mr. Douthat. I want to explain the letter we received from the mayor's council in my layman's terms. There's a lot in there, and I'm sure that I won't get my summary as accurate as the mayor's council might like. We received a letter at the beginning of January, or at the end of January, indicating the mayor's position on why the budget reverted. And the summary, my basic summary of that is, they acknowledged that Mr. Douthat did not upload the Form 4, which is what it's called, and I'll go over what that form is here in just a minute, to the DLGF. But they say he didn't do it because he didn't have the specific cuts to do it, and that this council needed to adopt those cuts. That's essentially the sum of what the mayor's position is. And that all comes down to these forms, and particularly I've heard about two forms. There's a Form 1 and a Form 4. There's also a Form 2 and a Form 4B, but all we've really been talking about is a Form 1 and a Form 4. Now, Form 1 is a document that you go on and you put in the information, and it provides you with a Form 4. So you can go onto the Gateway system and you can type in a Form 1, and it produces a Form 4 based on the information you put in there. So the controller reached out to the DLGF, and here's what the DLGF rep told him in his own words. DLGF confirmed the only thing they're looking for is the Form 4 ordinance that assigns the fund totals. That's what the controller said in an email on October 9th.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, that on October 9th, an email from the controller to his, to several people, to Bob Swentz, Jason Fenwick, and Mayor Collier, an email that was not provided to us, at least from my recollection and emails from the city. Controller says to these individuals, I spoke with DLGF. After reaching out to our DLGF rep, she confirmed the only thing that they're looking for is the Form 4 ordinance that assigns the fund totals. That's the only thing DLGF needs. We're being told today that it's because this council didn't give enough information to update a Form 1. You know, it's hard to read. That's your Form 4. It was attached to your ordinance, 2021. And unless we're concerned, here's your Form 1 from the year before. That's all you adopted. You didn't adopt the budget book. You adopted that form. Actually, this is from this year. That was submitted to the DLGF. And here's your one from the year before. That's what this council adopts. That's what this council has always adopted, at least since 2016. I know that because I was your counsel in 2016. We've always adopted a budget that has this form or a form like it attached. Once that form is adopted, it's supposed to be uploaded to the DLGF. Now, it has a place for the council to sign and a place for the mayor to sign. Your one on the far left, as you look at that screen, was never signed by the mayor, but it was, you overrode the mayor's veto on that form. The forms look exactly the same. There's nothing different about them other than the numbers. It lays out all the information in the exact same format, has numbers in all the locations, but this form was not uploaded to the DLGF. We already went over this email. As I told you, there was an email conversation. This is where the DLGF explained to the mayor, the administration, that in fact there is an ability to override the veto. I know that's difficult to read. They just provided the statute. And as I said, the statute in sum is that if the mayor vetoes the budget after October 1, anytime after October 1, so October 2, 3, 4, all the way to November 1st, you have 30 days to override that with a 2/3 vote.
But you were discussing whether that would be an option. Somebody suggested, what if you just wait to veto it to the last day while you, Bob, and Jason were talking?
I don't know when that conversation was or how it talked. I knew from earlier conversations that the strategy of waiting till the day before it's due and turning on the veto would not work.
The strategy of waiting until the day before it's due and turning in the veto would not work. It was a strategy. They knew that strategy didn't work. But it was a strategy. And I also have the question, the mayor used the words would not work. So does that, yes, make your own conclusion on what that means, but does that mean that there was, how can we get it to revert, and that's a way that it won't work, but maybe there's another way? And it was clearly something they discussed as a strategy. Now keep in mind, that conversation I just had with the mayor was after I showed him these emails. I told you, he told me I never had a conversation with Mr. Swintz, and then he says, well, maybe we did, but we didn't talk about that. And again, Mr. Swintz told us that's exactly what he told him. So I don't know who's telling the truth there, but either the mayor was told by Mr. Swintz at French Lick that he couldn't do that, or the mayor already knew it. But either way, the administration knew this, and yet they were still asking behind the scenes, how can we do this? Is this a way? Is this a strategy we can employ? So despite analysis that there are ways to make the cuts work, the mayor comes to the budget meeting. And I asked the mayor about this, and he actually told me in his deposition that he doesn't often come to the meetings, and he doesn't usually come to the budget proposals. And he actually didn't remember coming and speaking at that proposal until I showed it to him. But then he said, oh, yes, this was important enough that I came and spoke. And what he chose to allege, maybe without saying these exact words, but what this was going to vastly impact public safety. That was the message that the mayor delivered, both in writing and in person. This has the video. I'm not going to play it all, but I've pulled out some quotes, and I did my best to get them exactly right, but these are my typing. This is not a court reporter that did it. Mayor said it's important to note that our proposed budget is a balanced and responsible budget. That was not true. It was not balanced. I'll let you decide whether it was responsible. I'm not making that determination, but it was not balanced. Unfortunately, even though we provided a highly transparent proposed budget, the financial advisor for the city could not even identify what the other line items that you were cutting were because they just said other. I personally don't find that highly transparent, but I'll let you draw your conclusion on that. This will result in an overall 5% reduction in current salaries. The controller said he could make it work. Remember, he said he could make it work. But the mayor came before you and said, everybody in the city is going to lose their salaries by 5%. It will result in debilitating cuts in operations. The mayor's controller told him in an email, I can make this work. And this proposal he's talking about here is not your second proposal. It was your first one. It was the first one you introduced that the controller said he could make work. He then said the council's budget's now higher than the mayor's. And then he said, at the close of 2022, we will have to lay off one Department of Public Works worker, 4 police workers, 4 fire department employees, 4 parks employees, 3 mayor staff, and 3 dispatch. But his controller said he could make it work. That was never communicated to this council. What was communicated to this council and to the public was that you were trying to hurt public safety, you were trying to take away jobs in the public safety realm, and that you were going to cause everybody in the city to lose their money. But that's not what the controller was saying in emails to his boss. So the controller sends 2 more proposals in October that go back to the 2021 adopted budget, and presumably he's looking at what the impact of reverted budget would look like with and without additional expenditures or appropriations, because remember, he's asked about, do we get the additional appropriations or not? And so he's trying to figure out a way, what happens if we revert, how do we make this work? Now, I don't know if that was a proposal at this point to say, let's go to the council and say, let's just go back to 2021 and add 1.7, or if this was trying to figure out what happened with reversion. But he's running these scenarios. Again, these scenarios are not run by the council. And the mayor tells the council, please work with Humphrey. Now, I asked the mayor about this, and he said, clearly communication had broken down between the controller and the council, and so I thought that Humphrey might be a good conduit for conversation. Let's try to have that conversation through Humphrey. Now, according to these handwritten notes, there were actual meetings. These are Humphrey's handwritten notes of his meetings, both prep before the meeting and during the meeting with Mr. Denny. These meetings occurred. If anyone suggests they didn't, they occurred. These meetings occurred, and there's an indication in these notes, Tyler may already have found $2 million in cuts. Tyler may have already found it. Then Humphrey, or Mr. Nagila, tries to identify budget options. Indicates in notes that he's sent here to Bob and Jason, to Bob Swinson, Jason Fenwick. In this highlighted section, he says that the mayor appears inclined toward the option of identifying one-time expenditures to be covered by the $3.6 million. Now, we received testimony from Humphrey, and I didn't include it here because it's lengthy, but he told me that it was impossible to identify the $3.6 million in one-time expenditures because they're all over the budget. We've had Mr. Swins tell us it's not, those expenditures aren't actually in the budget. We have the mayor saying he doesn't think they're in the budget, and we have the controller telling me it would take way too long in this deposition for me right now to tell you what it is. Again, my summary. I can't tell you right now. It'd take too much time to go through and do all that. But there's at least a conversation here from the mayor to say, let's identify those items. That was never done. And I'll explain why in a minute, the shift in position. The city's financial advisor then says, you know what? Do whatever they're going to do. Let them do what they're going to do. Offer no suggestions or future compromises. That's his position. Let them do what they're going to do. Again, these are the people who are going to screw it up, and he said are going to find something to bitch about. Don't offer any suggestions or future compromises. That was the position of the city's financial advisor. There's also a conversation in that email, about, and I'll go back to it because I think this is important to clear the record. He says, I was kind of floored when it was suggested on our call the other day that these amendments were done by the attorney. If that is truly the case, my thought would be to just let it go. I'll be real clear. While we at Bose McKinney & Evans will implement the policies and the ordinances that you ask us to draft, these are council ordinances. A council member has to support them to the council. And while it may have been drafted by us, it was not a direction from us. We're not financial advisors. We did what the council asked us to do. I just want to be clear about that. So I don't have a lot of emails from Mr. Fenwick. I have asked for his emails and have communicated with his lawyer. I suspect this will be part of the additional investigation once we receive these. But this email is important for a couple of reasons. The mayor has indicated and his attorneys have indicated a privilege over what's called executive materials. I still have yet to identify what the Indiana law is on executive privilege because I don't think there's any case law that says there's an executive privilege in Indiana, but they have asserted an executive privilege that's based on federal law with respect to the president and the president's right to have certain executive communications with his staff. And they assert based on the separation of powers in the state of Indiana that it should apply here as well. I don't know that there's case law in Indiana that's addressed that issue. I disagree with it, but that's an issue that we may have to address with the court at some point. But I bring it up because one of the documents that they've claimed executive privilege over was shared with Mr. Fenwick. This is version 2 of a plan of response. I think there's 4 versions. I don't know that I've seen version 1. I have seen version 2 because it was attached to Mr. Fenwick's email. And he said, I made some deletions in the attached. I don't think we want any questions from them at this point. One of the things he deleted out of what the mayor sent was, if you have any questions, let me know. And he said, Jason Fenwick, the former controller, and keep in mind at this point, Jason Fenwick works at First Merchants. He's not a consultant of the city. He's not paid by the city. The mayor indicated to me that he's a good friend and someone who they started this journey together, and so he's a trusted advisor and confidant. Mr. Douthit told me that he's a mentor, but he's not a consultant for the city. But he's advising in emails. I don't think we want any questions from them. And this is in regard to a letter that was sent to you. You may recall that letter. I'm going to go over the one that was actually sent to you in just a moment. So Mr. Nagila tells me that even though Mr. Denny and he were having meetings, he never received any line item cuts from Mr. Denny. He told me that he couldn't get a hold of Mr. Denny at the key moments, that he had called and tried to get a hold of Mr. Denny, but he wasn't responding. But in our handwritten notes, we see there's 3 options, or at least it's written down as 3 options. Now, Humphrey told me these were more like deal points or discussion points, but I asked him about what the different options were. So the handwritten notes are difficult to decipher, but based on my summary of his testimony, he said, no, the first option was no OR spending in 2023, no operating reserve spending in 2023. That was the first option. In response to this, there's a conversation with Mr. Denny and Mr. Nagila, as reported by Mr. Nagila, where Mr. Denny said, if you can identify where those $3.6 million are, according to Mr. Nagila, Mr. Denny would support the budget as presented. Now, I don't know if that's what Mr. Denny said, but that was how Mr. Nagila understood it, but he still didn't identify where those items were. The other 2 options were approve our budget as is, or 3, adopt the mayor's budget. So option 2 and 3 are really, as Mr. Nagila told me, they're just the same, just different ways of saying it. Those were their options. Ask
Was option 3 different than option 2?
It's not any different. These were just notes, talking points that why we're sticking to our budget. There's been a lot of plans. Plans have already been made. Commitments have already been made. We believe this is a responsible plan, financial plan for the year.
Okay.
And so
is it fair to say there's 2 options? Council, you restore our budget and approve it, or don't, and we're not going to help you?
in a nutshell, restore the budget. You're not going to come back to the general funds, operating reserves, since that's your main concern. Or go ahead and cut the budget, give us the line items, and we'll submit the budget.
Okay. In your conversations with Mr. Denny, based on what you're telling me today, it seems to me that at least the initial conversations, you understood him to say he was concerned about the $3.6 million in reserved funding and the questions surrounding it, correct?
That was pretty much everything. The issue we talked about, the $3.6 million.
And he told you, if you can just tell me where those items are, I'll approve your budget. That was the first meeting, right?
As is, correct.
Okay. And you never showed him where those were because they're all over the budget. That was the answer.
Correct.
Okay.
I call it the ultimatum: restore our budget, or we're not going to help you. That was my summary, and Mr. Nagila said, yes, that's right. But I asked him at the end, and I'm sure you heard it there, the whole issue was just where the $3.6 million was, right? Yes. And you didn't identify it for him. No, I did not, because it was all over the budget. I just keep coming back to that, because in my opinion, we wouldn't be here today if we just had identified where $3.6 million were that we could cut and not spend one-time spending on. And if the answer was, we can't cut it because we need it for operations, I think if we would have said that to this council, we'd be in a different place. Instead of telling the council, and that's speculation, instead of telling the council it's one-time expenses and then refusing to identify them, if it had just been, we're going to be short on operations and we need it for next year, then we could have had that conversation about how do we do that. And what do we need to cut in the operations, if anything? Maybe nothing, maybe something. So now there's a conversation on the 20th indicating that Mr. Nagila had his meeting with Mr. Denny, and he communicated everything the mayor asked him to, except of the mayor's intent to use the veto power should they choose to proceed with the amended proposal. At that point, your letter would be most appropriate. The task is now on Sean to convince Lisa as well as the remaining council members. Now, I think from Mr. Nagila's perspective, what Mr. Denny was supposed to convince the rest of the council is to just adopt the mayor's budget as is, because that was the only option that was given. Adopt our budget as is, or cut it on your own, and we're not going to help you. And I don't think that's how Mr. Denny saw those meetings. He understood they were working together to cut these $3.6 million, and everybody understood what that issue was. Here's the email that ultimately gets sent. I know it's really small print, so I'm just going to read you the highlighted part that I think is important. The mayor said a lot of things in this message to the council, but here's what he proposed. In an effort at offering the only acceptable compromise, we are proposing as a one-time, time-sensitive offer that we will freeze any administrative operational reserve spending in budget year 2023. Therefore, your concerns that this administration is planning on spending down the entire OR before 2024 no longer has merit. The mayor's proposal now, according to this document, is we'll freeze the OR spending in 2023. So this year, we won't spend any more OR. And I think for the council, the concern was 2022 spending and 2023 spending, not just 2023 spending. And even though a lot of the cuts were other, the mayor claims in this letter that the council's being vindictive and is cutting every department's budget. And again, the things you cut out of everybody's department's budget were other items that were not identified. After you asked the controller to please identify the items you wanted to cut. You want to cut these park expenses, where are they? We're not going to help you. And while the mayor knows he is concerned about the $3.6 million, and everybody knew that was the issue, as we just heard, there's no discussion about where to identify those items. I asked the mayor about this.
Say that my compromise in the email I wrote, I have the wrong year there, I'm sure, in hindsight, that what I meant to say was that we would not spend any of the OR in 2022. Okay. That was the biggest hang-up that I was hearing from the council, that they did not want us to spend down the OR to that level. And so my proposal was, my compromise would be, okay, we won't spend any OR in 2022. But please maintain the proposed budget.
Okay.
So that 2023, that's my error. Okay, that's not anybody else's but my error in the email.
Okay, but you shared that email with several people.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was maybe the third or fourth version of that correspondence?
I don't know that was the third or fourth version of it. I think that what I had done was we had discussed among ourselves, okay, how do we get to an adopted budget and not create a lot of havoc, I suppose. And my suggestion was at that time, what if we just simply do not spend any OR, leave that in place, then will the council adopt a budget?
Okay.
So the mayor says he had a typo in his email. He meant 2022, not 2023. Had the offer from the administration been, we won't spend the $3.6 million, I think that would have matched exactly what the council was asking for. And if that's what the mayor meant and a typo caused us to be here, that's unfortunate. But I continued to ask others about this, and you'll see what Mr. Nagila says, because he contradicts that testimony in just a moment. When the mayor does not receive the response to the 24-hour offer, and I put offer in quotes here because What he just told you there, I would say, is an offer, what he said in his testimony. What he put in the email was not an offer. It was just approve what we said, and next year we won't spend money. In 2024, I won't spend any money. Or the 2023 budget, I won't spend any money, not 2022, which is what we were concerned about this time. The mayor says, after that 24-hour period, I am done negotiating. I'm done. Not interested in working with the council anymore. Asked.
So the plan was, don't cut the 3.6 million and we won't spend it.
Approve the budget as is with the 3.6 million, and we would not come back to you for additional appropriation.
Okay. But were you still planning to spend the 3.6 million in unreserved if it was budgeted?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the plan was, don't touch the budget, just leave it alone. That was the offer that the administration gave.
Right.
Okay. And you were saying that in that message that that was the spirit of reaching an agreement. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. But just so I'm clear, the agreement was we gave you a budget, we're sticking by our budget, we just adopt our budget.
Correct.
Okay.
If you approved it as is, which is what the mayor said he wanted to do, and he told you he was freezing it, Mr. Nagila said they still plan to spend it. That was the plan. That was how he understood the plan. Maybe he misunderstood the date as well, but that's how he understood the plan, and that's the plan that he was told to execute because he was the one appointed by the administration to execute the plan, the council. You then adopted a 2022 budget ordinance. I call it the 2022 budget. The mayor's council says what you adopted is not a budget. I believe it's a budget because it's a Form 4. This is the document in the middle of your actual cover ordinance as to what you adopted a budget as, and then you adopted a Form 4 that I showed you just a minute ago. You made additional cuts from what your initial proposal said, but you did it by fund level. Keep in mind that Mr. Douthit emailed to Mr. Swenson, the mayor, said all that DLGF is looking for is that fund level cut on a Form 4. Though you adopted a budget, there's another question. Mr. Douthit emails the Form 4, okay, attached. I hope all's well. I've just attached our signed Form 4. However, I do have a question regarding this form. As you can see from the attachment, the mayor did not sign or provide an approve or veto selection. What does this mean for us regarding the 2022's budget? The mayor's just not going to veto it. The mayor's not going to sign it. He's just going to let it lie. What does that mean for us? Now, an email is not submission of the budget. You have to submit the documents on Gateway. So I want to be clear about that, and Mr. Douthit knew that. This is an attempt perhaps to get more information from the DLGF, as he says, trying to get more information. He also in another email asked them to unlock the Form 1 because he needed to make changes. I don't think those changes were ever implemented. And he does not mention into the DLGF in these emails any concern about line item cuts. He doesn't say, here's what the council adopted, but they didn't cut line items. I posit to you that's because in his emails from earlier that we went over, he already knew all that the DLGF wanted was the Form 4. He just didn't upload it. This email also gives me some concern. This is a drafted and never sent email that was provided in Discovery. It's provided electronically, so we used our software at our firm on the right-hand side to discover the properties on this email. This email was, it's important to look at the date. October 27th, 2021 at 11:14 a.m. is when the document has begun to be drafted according to its properties. The document is open for roughly 2 hours. Mr. Nagila told me he never sent this email to the president or to Councilor Denny. I want to read what it says there. As you are aware, municipal budgets must be submitted to the DLGF by November 1. The cuts made to the initial proposed budget must also be reflected on specific line items by fund, department, and account. Proposed cuts appears to be at the fund level and not down to the department and account level. In order for us to file this budget with the DLGF, we will need that information. In an attempt to resolve this, I have tried to contact the Finance Committee Chair via phone with no response. October 27, 2021 at roughly 1:17 p.m. this document's closed, never sent. It is shared between the Deputy Controller and the Controller, but never sent. Had this email been sent, I would suspect that Counselor Denny would have said, what line item cuts do we need to do, and let's get them done. We have time. Let's go get these line item cuts done, if that's what you need. But this email was never sent. Keep in mind, he said he couldn't
Appears to be
reach-
that same email that we looked at in 40, or the same draft email that we looked at in 41, correct?
Correct.
Okay, if you turn to the second page, I'll represent to you, this is a printout of the property information. Do you see that it says it was saved on October 27th by Nagila Humphrey?
Correct.
And that you spent about 120 minutes editing it, is that right? But that's a total amount of editing time.
And in between doing work, it's probably sitting up on my screen.
Sure. I'm not suggesting that it took you 2 hours to write a 3 or 4 paragraph, but fair to say a fair amount of thought went into this communication between you and Mr. Douthit, correct?
Correct.
All right. And drafted on or about October 27th, is that right?
That's correct.
That same day you were communicating with Mr. Denny via text and phone call, is that right?
I don't recall. I know everything was happening all at the same time. But I also know that Mr. Denny was not responding. At this time, I was not having any communication with Mr. Denny. I may have reached out, but we were not having any communication.
October 27th, the same day he said he was having no communication with Mr. Denny. These are text messages. The blue is Mr. Denny, the black is Mr. Nagila. Good evening, Humphrey, says Mr. Denny. Just tried to call you back on the other number. Wasn't sure if I connected with your voicemail or not, so didn't leave a message. I'm free for the next hour or after 1 p.m. tomorrow if either work for you. Sounds pretty responsive to me. What did Mr. Nagila say? Keep in mind, this is 3 hours after he closed that email. He didn't send it. He's just put an email together that I need the budget cuts. It's dire. The world's on fire if I don't get these things. And here's what he says. Sorry, Mr. Colshawn. Earlier I had a question regarding your budget, but I think I figured it out. Thanks. No communication that we can't submit this budget because there's no line item cuts. No communication that I haven't been able to get a hold of you, but thanks for calling me back today. Instead, the message from the administration is Mr. Denny was non-responsive. Mr. Denny was not non-responsive. He was responding the same day that Mr. Nagila was going to ask him about the line item cuts and chose not to ask. I asked Mr. Nagila, who told you not to send that email? He said, no one, I made the decision myself. No one, I made the decision myself. Nobody from the administration ever communicated with anyone in need for line item cuts. Instead, they had it figured out. Meanwhile, Chief Batalis does some reconnaissance on behalf of this city and asks your city attorney about the budget and whether it's effective. And I want to read this highlighted section. Again, it's difficult to read, but on this PowerPoint slide, but your counsel, Ms. Wheeler, said, so in my mind, the second amended version is effective. I'm not aware of anything that would change that opinion, so I'm not sure how this rumor got started that somehow the second amendment wasn't effective. If you or Caitlin, the city attorney, are aware of some specific concerns, just let me know. City attorney's copied on this email. If there was some kind of error, we still have until November 1st to fix it if needed. Thanks, Chris. Now, from our perspective, the Form 4 was all that needed to be adopted. I'm told now that the controller was unable to upload this document because he didn't have a Form 1. If that was the case, a simple email saying we need some help filling out the Form 1, and here's what we need to do, and we don't know if you have enough time to get it done, but that's what needs to happen. Then we could have determined if there was something to do. That was not the communication. Instead, the communication was, thank you. This is from the city attorney. Thank you for looping me in. I spoke with Dino earlier and indicated that he had requested some documentation information. I'm happy to be CC'd or included in the correspondence as well. Not, yeah, we do have a concern. We don't think you provided line item cuts. And keep in mind, this is, again, October 27th, the same day that Mr. Nagila is writing an email that he doesn't send, and he's alleging Mr. Denny was not responding to him. I want you to pay attention in that deposition testimony, too, how long he took thinking about that answer. It's important. It's not just the words, but when I asked him, did you have communication, he paused because he knew there was some communication, but he couldn't remember the dates. It was the same date. Just to round that out, it was the same date. Chief Batalis sent this on to the city attorney, to the mayor, to the controller, and to Mr. Nagila, as well as to Jason Fenwick. Here's what I received. Thanks, Dino. No communication back from, as I said, the chief or from city attorney. Also, no communication from the mayor, from the controller, from the deputy or assistant controller, or from Mr. Fenwick for that matter, that there was a concern. Nothing. This is what we received from the law firm of Kruger, Gardis and Regis, which is the mayor's attorneys in this matter. These are quotes from the letter that we received. It would no doubt have been preferable for the controller to submit the incomplete Form 1, even in light of the fact that it did not include the details statutorily required by the Budget Act. There's two acts that they talk about, a Budget Act and a Taxation Act. They acknowledge the Taxation Act, which is the one that says you got to submit a Form 4, does not explicitly require line item information. And finally, it is our opinion that the controller failed to formally upload the signed Form 4. That's their opinion, and they say it's based on his understanding that the documents as passed by the council were incomplete and could not be submitted. The document that you passed was a Form 4. Form 4, and I hate to keep hitting this point, the same Form 4 that the controller said back in October was all DLGF was looking for. And despite these statements, the mayor, the controller, and the mayor's law firm say that the reason is because the council did not adopt the complete line items. Our law firm disagrees that you needed to have those line items in this budget because all that the DLGF was looking for was a Form 4. We agree with the mayor's law firm that it would have been preferable if the controller had submitted the forms. If he had submitted the forms, then we could find out if the budget from DLGF would be approved or not. And I want to acknowledge I've had several conversations with Mr. Bosman, and we've talked about that issue. It would have been preferable. We've all agreed that that would have been a preferable situation. The day before the approval or veto is due, the mayor meets with the city attorney, Mr. Fenwick, Mr. Douthit, Mr. Swentz, and outside counsel at Taft to discuss a budget. All I've ever received from that is a Zoom link. I've received emails regarding that Zoom link, but I've never been able to figure out what happened at that meeting. I did ask, and I believe there was an objection on an attorney-client basis. Right around this same time, there's a conversation between Mr. Swentz and the city attorney, where Mr. Swentz is identifying that he had a conversation, and that conversation involved, or the last time that he had a conversation with Ms. Bowler involved a conversation where she was having an issue with the council's attorney, and Ms. Bowler responded, that is great. That was most definitely an interesting night. I believe that the fire chief picked a fight with crazy Tyrell Giles during the next council meeting. It's always someone. The mayor then vetoes the budget through pocket veto. When I say pocket veto, I mean he did not issue a memo explaining the basis for his veto. He simply didn't sign it. He did not sign the veto box, which is provided on the ordinance form. Instead, he just chose not to write it, not to sign it. The council, following its statutory right on November 17th, holds a meeting and unanimously passed a transfer, and you also override the mayor's veto budget, budget of veto. November 24th is the deadline to submit the form. Mr. Douthit had emailed it previously, but he did not do anything else with it. He did not submit anything to DLGF after the veto override, at least from what we've seen so far. Then there's some emails about what do we do now if the budget reverts. So the mayor asks several times, has there been any communication, or maybe not several times, has there been any communication from council, or can I assume we have reverted? Now, what's the communication from the council? I believe the mayor's told we're waiting on line item cuts, but the council's never told we need line item cuts. We've adopted a budget. We're moving on to the next item. We assume our budget's going to be implemented. We assume it's going to be submitted, and if there's an issue, DLGF will let us know about the issue, and we'll fix it if we can. That was our position at that time. We didn't know that it wasn't being submitted. And then the mayor says, assuming that we have reverted, would this free us up at least a portion of the operating reserve to fund projects like the repaving of the community park lots? Keep in mind, earlier this year, the community park lots were closed by the administration, and we'll go over that in just a minute, as a result of lack of funding. But even back in 2022, he was saying, doesn't this give us enough money to do this project? It's not known why they didn't pave the community parking lot as planned in 2020, and instead in 2023 blamed it on lack of funding. In fact, there's a conversation right here in response to that from Mr. Douthit saying, community park parking lots, we may only be able to do the main lot in 2022, just depends on pricing. This is what the mayor did this year. A sign up that said, or his administration, roads closed pending approval of funding. Pending approval of funding. Funding that the controller said would have been available before. We got a freeze up here on that one. There it goes. Okay, then we receive a 1782 notice. Now, a 1782 notice is just a form notice that the state issues on your budget. It either says, we've reviewed your budget and it's approved, we've approved your budget and there's issues, or you've reverted. The 1782 notice was received on December 6th. Mr. Douthit told me in his deposition that it's very well possible that the first time you received the 1782 notice was when it was provided in discovery, that it was never given to you before that. When you have this form, the city has 10 days to review and request budget revisions before DLGF finalizes the numbers. That form could have been corrected. Mr. Douthit tells me that it didn't match exactly 2021, but he didn't ask for any changes. It didn't provide any line items on it, but he didn't note that he didn't know what to do with line items. He just signs and returns the form with the no changes box checked. Here's what the 1782 notice said. I've excerpted, okay, so it's a large document. I've just pulled out the things I want you to look at. So you have 10 days to respond. No extension will be granted. If no response is received, the budgets, rates, and levies identified in the budget order for your county will be certified. So he didn't even have to respond, and it would have been certified, but he did. He checked no changes requested and signed it. Then on the general fund budget and every budget line item, here's what the DLGF said. The total appropriations were restricted to the prior year total due to not failure to submit line items, not failure of the council to adopt a budget, not failure to follow the Budget Act, failure to submit budget forms in Gateway. The total property tax levies were restricted due to failure to submit budget forms in Gateway. So why did the budget revert? Because forms weren't submitted in Gateway. What did this council do? You adopted the form that Mr. Douthit said early on. The DLGF says that's the only form they're looking for. It was never uploaded into Gateway. Had it been, and your budget reverted, we'd be here for a different reason, but it was not. So as I said, Mr. Douthit receives more money in the reverted budget than he anticipated. He indicates that he can create a line item budget to match those additional amounts. So he has more money. So let me explain what the budget reversion statute says. Budget reversion statute says if you don't adopt the budget by the adoption deadline or the DLGF otherwise determines you haven't followed the rules, your budget reverts to the previous year's annual appropriations. Layman's terms, you revert to the exact budget that was adopted and approved by DLGF in 2021. Okay, so you would get the same budget that the DLGF gave you in 2021. It means all the line items, the appropriations should match, the funds should match. Mr. Douthit notes that the numbers aren't the same, and he notes this to the mayor and says, hey, the numbers aren't the same. But instead of telling the DLGF, I think you got the reversion wrong, or calling and saying, what do we do here? Instead, he told me it's uncharted territory, so what they did was they just made line items where they had more money. So if they had more money, they assumed they had money to spend somewhere. They said they followed the certified budget. Well, a certified budget is not by line item, it is by fund total. There's no line item detail in a certified budget. And so what Mr. Douthit did, and he said we, so I put Douthit in the mayor. He told me we, but I know Mr. Douthit was involved, was money, and the financial advisor as well. Money was moved into line items based because they had more money. I see that as when you cut money and they say we need line items, but when they get more money, they don't need line items. I think that's kind of, here's what Mr. Douthit
Is that what you did then, and allocating the budget?
The reverted budget that the state certified actually had a higher certification than the prior year budget, which was odd to say the least.
So if it was higher, did you spend those monies that were over the prior year's budget?
We went with the certified budget from the state, which was the 5 or 6 million from Exhibit 5.
And did you go to the council to appropriate that money that was certified over what was the prior 2020 year budget? 2021 year budget, excuse me.
We went with the certification from the DLG.
With the certification from the DLGF, they did not come back for additional appropriations.
I'll try to restate it best I can. Do you know if during the, let me ask this, do you know if the ARP plan gets presented to the council?
Yes.
Okay.
It was presented.
And when it was presented to the council, or at any time prior, do you know if anybody informed the council that the budget had reverted, that the 2022 budget reverted back to 2021 numbers?
I'm not aware of anyone informing the council that the budget reverted.
Okay, and you didn't inform them?
I did not.
Okay.
In fact, no one informed you from the administration. Now, I will tell you that the mayor's position, as represented to us, is that Baker Tilly informed you. But Baker Tilly did that in a presentation that was not attended by all the council members. It's in footnotes on the presentation. You can see how difficult it is to read even my large print on these presentations. But I don't think that the council's, this body's advisory folks telling you anything is the same as the administration communicating to you our budget reverted. I put this in here on the ARP plan, and we're going to switch into the ARP plan, the American Rescue Plan, for just a minute, because I think it's important to know that's an additional budgetary request. It's an additional appropriation of funds. And one of the things that you're allowed to do with ARP funds, and the council actually included in its plan with ARP funds, is you can use those monies to offset if you didn't receive the same amount of money that you expected. There's this offset provision. And that was one of the things you put in the plan you would authorize. Now, it still has to be shown that it's actual revenues you didn't collect as a result of the pandemic. But I think it's important that when you know what your budget is, that you're explained, hey, we're not using the same budget you guys adopted. It's a different budget. But that was never explained during the ARP process. However, through the year, there were additional appropriations requested. I've highlighted some of them here. All these additional appropriations, at no time when these additional appropriations came before the council were you ever informed that these were additional appropriations because the budget reverted, or the budget reverted, we didn't have enough money in here. It was just we need more money for X project or Y project. And there were several of them. It was never brought to your attention during the year. However, in the spring of 2022, we have this document that appears on the council's website. Still there, if you search for 2022 adopted budget, this document will come up on a website called the 2022 adopted budget. There is no 2022 adopted budget according to the administration. There's a 2022 reverted budget. Now, what date did they use? Let's zoom in on that. November 17th, 2021. Remember back a few slides? That's the date you override the veto. Date you override the veto is the document that's still online on the council's on the city's website saying that's the date the budget was adopted. Now, I don't know if that was done just because they looked for somebody put that number in because that was the date that the council considered it, but I can tell you that I think it's misleading because it's not an adopted budget. Ask Tyler about this.
So if we look back at Exhibit 3, that section I read, it said they overrode the veto of Ordinance 12-2021. Now I've given you as Exhibit 4, Ordinance 12-2021. So does that refresh your recollection as to when the council overrode the mayor's veto?
It does.
Was it November 17th, 2021?
Yes.
Is that why you picked that date to put on your adopted budget online?
That would make sense.
If I look at this budget, is it the budget that the council adopted on November 17th, 2021? This Exhibit 2?
It is the reverted budget.
So it's not the one the council adopted, correct?
Correct.
And it doesn't say anywhere in this document online that you told me transparently discloses that the budget reverted, correct?
To my knowledge, there's nowhere in this document that states that it's a reverted budget.
What's perhaps more concerning is this is an excerpt from that budget. If it's a reverted budget, your 2021 adopted budget and your 2022 reverted budget ought to match. There's several key components where they do not. This is one that I specifically asked Mr. Douthit about, and I've cited the statute there for you, 367411. It says if you don't pass the ordinance, you did pass an ordinance, they just say it doesn't meet the requirements. We think it does. Before November 2nd of each year, the most recent annual appropriations, not annual plus additional, Most recent annual appropriations and annual tax levy are continued for the ensuing budget year. If the DLGF certifies you have more money, that's just money in a fund. It has to be appropriated. So what you do then with your budget is you get the money in a fund, you go back to your last appropriations, and you apply them. I will tell you it is standard practice among financial advisors when these things happen to figure out where things need to be tweaked and moved. It is my opinion that you should come back to the council as the body that does the appropriations and say, our budget reverted, we need to move money from line item 2 to line item 3. We're asking for an appropriation to do that. And just so we understand the different budget mechanisms you can do. Within a department, funds can be moved from personal services, for example, to supplies through a transfer. You can move money through a transfer. From department to another department, it requires a deduction, which this council can do, and an appropriation, which requires a process, an additional appropriation. The controller can also, within budget line items, move funds, like if you have a 410.001, he could pay a bill that really files into 002, because it's all under personal services, as long as it's within that major category. What we're talking about here, though, on this line item is not moving money within the budget, and because this is out of the controller's budget. 2021, $790,000. 2022, what's posted online, $490,000. That's a $300,000 difference. And it's not within that line. It's not within that same department, so I got moved to a different department. Under standard understanding of the SBOA and DLGF rules, that should have been done by an appropriation, in my opinion. It was not. There was no appropriation to do that. 36487 provides that a warrant, which is really just a check, but we call them warrants because a lot of these rules are written before we necessarily wrote checks or paid with credit cards or things like that. So a warrant for payment of a claim can only be made with an appropriation by the council. I asked Mr. Douthit if he had an appropriation to do that thing that you just saw, and here's what he said.
So in June or July of 2021, you gave salary raises that were effective roughly immediately in 2021.
I believe so.
Okay. And then when you got the budget at the end of 2021, you had to account for the fact you'd already given these employees raises.
Yes.
Okay. Did you go ask the council for an appropriation to do that?
No, we went with the certified budget, so from the DLGF.
We did not ask for an appropriation. Certified budget did not contain any detail about paying any salaries. It only provided a general number.
Does the certified budget from the DLGF say you can pay, you said it, okay, let me back up. Did you tell me that the certified budget from the DLGF did not include the raises and what was certified to you?
Well, the DLGF certified didn't, it didn't say one way or the other. It just gave you a general fund total number in that instance. That certification, if I'm recalling the correct DLGF budget order, I only provided the fund total for the general fund.
Okay.
We went with the certified budget, but there was no certified budget on the salary increases. The money was moved. Now, perhaps the money should have been moved because you needed to account for the salaries, but in my opinion, that requires council action. So the council is now ready to adopt the 2023 budget. Budget comes forward to you, and just like every other year, the council adopts that same Form 4 I showed you before, doesn't identify budget by line item, and there's no concern uploading this one. But then there becomes questions. Mr. Douthit tells you in November, just right around Thanksgiving, on November 17th, that there's some concerns about not being able to pay some expenses, particularly expenses that related to, as I understand it, your redistricting and your legal bills. You had a redistricting contract where you had to do redistricting last year, and those weren't being paid. And Mr. Denny said, we allocated $259,000 here, but what you're showing me in the budget is actually closer to $150,000. Why is that? What's the difference? Mr. Douthit says he needs to look at the ordinance. He needs to look at the ordinance. That's what he says. I need to look at the ordinance. He doesn't say I need to go back and see what the certified budget says. He doesn't say I need to go look and at what the reverted budget was. He doesn't tell you, well, that's because we reverted, remember? So it's not going to be the same. You're looking at the proposal, and we reverted. He says I have to look at the ordinance. I'm going to skip the video. That's what he says. You can find the video on YouTube. 6 days later, on the night before Thanksgiving, Mr. Douthit, for the first time for the administration, acknowledges the budget reverted. That's how we got here. You found out the evening before Thanksgiving in an email sent at 8:30 p.m. the night before the holiday that the budget reverted. And then he says, for those who attended the Baker Tilly budget workshop, you'll recall that your advisor mentioned that as well. He knows he hasn't told you, so he goes back and looks for a place where it has. You've never been told until this time. In my opinion, then there's then obstruction of how the council is engaging in its investigation. We received information early on that the council attempted to adopt some resolutions. Those were all vetoed regarding the an investigation into what happened here. The council transferred funds from one budget line item to the other. We were told that can't be done because the way that it was transferred was at the wrong type of meeting. You did it at a special meeting. You should have done it at a regular meeting. Bose disagrees with those positions, but those are the positions that have been explained to us. Despite there's an override of the veto, there's no transfer of funds that's done, and this council also hired Bose, McKinney, and Evans. We have a contract with you that's adopted at the beginning of every year. That contract includes the right of the council to retain us for other matters. We retain for other matters through a motion of this council, and the council requested that a retainer be paid so that bills could be paid, and we wouldn't get in a situation where we couldn't fund what the council thought was an appropriate investigation. I want to note that this is important because what the budget that was proposed to you in 2022 had was no money available in what we used to call the council discretionary line item. That wasn't included in the proposal. The way the statute works is if money is included in a proposal, you can cut it, but if it's not included in a proposal, you can't increase it. So you can't take a line item from 0 up. That's what the statute says. Now, we believe that you have the right to hire attorneys on terms that you deem appropriate, and we believe that includes the right to pay those attorneys what you deem is an appropriate amount to pay those attorneys without oversight from other branches of government, because that would interfere with the balance of powers. But this is where we end up, is with these various actions. I will acknowledge that we have received, as you can tell tonight, a lot of information from the administration. They have given us information. The mayor did sit for a deposition. Mr. Nagila sat for a deposition. Mr. Douthit sat for a deposition, and I'm thankful that they did that. It was after we had to redo everything, though. We did everything, and they said, these appear to be errors, so we know you can fix them, so we'll comply once you fix these errors. And then it took months. It took a month at least to get documents, more than that. Documents that really should have been pretty easy to provide to us. I understand hiring attorneys. I don't fault Mr. Bosma or his firm at all for being involved and doing the job they're doing for their client. They're doing a good job for their client. But we have had to work, Chris Wheeler and I have had to work really hard to get this information. It's cost a lot more, in my opinion, to engage in this fight than to just get the information on the front end. Frankly, I didn't want to sit down and do depositions. I'll be real honest with you. I'm okay doing them if we need to, but I don't like to say, come to deposition and bring all these documents. But that was the position we felt we were backed into to get answers quickly. Currently, none of Bose's claims are being paid. There have been emails that I've seen from the controller to your financial consultant you've hired to do investigation, where there's been an indication that there's no money left in your budget account, and so they're doing work at their own risk. There are emails indicating that you can't pay your attorneys. Ms. Voller at a town hall did indicate that the mayor does not intend to provide any money for the investigation because he's already answered the questions and there's nothing else that needs to be provided. Now, I have had conversations with the mayor's legal team where we're trying to solve these things. I'm hopeful that we can solve them. I don't know if they can be or not, but we've tried. We've worked hard, and I think Mr. Bosma can say that's true. We've sat down and we've had conversations, and it includes providing funding through those conversations, but we cannot reach a resolution that we feel is the right resolution for both sides yet. Obviously, we'll present those to you and let you guys decide if you want to make a resolution, but where we are right now is there's no money in your budget. I'm here tonight hoping that I'm going to get paid, believing I should be paid for the work that I've done. But currently, that's where we are. Now we've recently had what I would call a pivot to seeking more ARP funding. This is a pivot because the previous communications indicated that there was no need for ARP funding this year. I'm going to go to this first. This is what the mayor said about the $250,000 that the council requested. I'm just holding up because we've got a delay on the screen there. I'll come back. Oh, there it is now.
And so I'll ask you again, Mayor, the council's asking you for an appropriation,
Specifically.
$250,000 for the budget investigation of you and your administration, because it's going to be very expensive.
I understand that.
Okay. And your response to that is?
The council has yet to ask me for an appropriation.
I just asked on behalf of the council. You said earlier the council or their
I
legal.
won't answer that in this theater.
So you're refusing to answer my question.
If there's a formal request, I'll do it.
Understood.
There's a formal request. Mr. Giles asked in a meeting right after this for the administration to please work with the council and to appropriate these fundings. The council submitted a budget or an appropriation ordinance, which is a request to the mayor, and the mayor vetoed it. This council overrode it, and it's after the veto was overridden within a matter of days, the mayor sued you. Those are the facts and why I think that's an effort. Now, I will acknowledge that we're working together with attorneys on the other side trying to resolve things, because frankly, spending money on attorneys to fight each other is not where I want to be. I want to find ways forward. And I know that the mayor's council does too. I know that's true. But we're here tonight because we haven't been able to resolve that, and so we're providing you with what we've learned so far. And where we are now is the mayor, instead of approving money for the budget investigation, has chose to sue the council under a theory that you can't appropriate money for your attorneys on your own, that you need his approval. This is the mayor's lawsuit. The council has, we maintain that the actions were legally valid and that the separation of powers prevents the mayor, I put the word defunding here, perhaps that's a bit strong, from preventing funding of an investigation of the mayor and his administration. We think that would violate the separation of powers. So we filed on your behalf an answer and a counterclaim asserting exactly that, and asserting some of the things we've discovered tonight, including that money was spent without appropriations coming to this council. This is the ARP plan. I told you it was a pivot. This is the 2023 ARP allocation plan that's being submitted to you. It's interesting because the plan and the expenditures that were just approved a year ago didn't include public safety. Now they do. I'm not saying it can't be used for public safety or that might not be an appropriate use. I'm just pointing out that it's a pivot and a change that's come at the same time we're doing this investigation. I can tell you when I was here in 2016 and there were cuts, it was about public safety. That's what the issue came forward. In fact, in the email chains we've seen, there's actually an email where the mayor forwards a Fox 59 communication about that, and Mr. Fenwick responds with, they invented defunding the police. That is, it seems like every time we make a decision about funding and how to fund things, it always comes back to you're hurting public safety, which is, when in 2016 that wasn't our intent. I know that wasn't your intent in 2022, and I don't think we're holding up ARP today because of this. It's just a question of where is the money, what's been spent, and let's get some answers so we can make sure we spend it correctly. This, however, is the capital plan, and the capital plan indicates for police vehicles, no additional impact on operating budget is needed for 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, that there's no additional operating impact needed. So apparently it's already assumed in the budget, and the same for the fire engine, that there's no additional impact needed. Now, whether you need additional apparatus or not, it's totally not my decision. I'm just pointing out what the documents say. Completely your decision, and the fire chief may have reasons why it's appropriate to spend that money now. I'm just saying this is where we always come back to, is public safety. Also, in the 2023 total city budget, there was an indication of how much money was going to be spent from the COVID-19 ARP fund, and it was $0. That was what was presented to you. Again, is it appropriate to spend it now? Perhaps. Is it an appropriate thing to ask you? Absolutely. Should you consider it seriously? Yes. But I think it's fair for you to understand this is all wrapped up into budget discussion. Last kind of issue that I wanted to point out that we've come across during this is another budget matter that you took where you adopted an ordinance in 2021 for funding for fire station number 39, and you included in kind of a unique inclusion in one of your ordinances or resolutions for leases was that you must include in the $10,500,000 in bonds, construction costs of 5 four-fold apparatus bay doors for the front bay exits for public safety. These are pictures of those doors. They do not appear to me to be four-fold bay doors as indicated was required for the spending. Something that this council required. And the reason this council required is because it was an understanding from the fire guys that if the electricity goes out or they have an issue with the door not opening, they've got to be able to get out and make runs. And so can you get us these doors that will open manually, not just electronically? So we have filed our counterclaims. Those, and I know this is going really long. I'm sorry, we've been about 2 hours, but I wanted to get you all the information that I could. The mayor, the controller, and the deputy controller, we have alleged that there was a violation of law in the reversion of the budget by not submitting the Form 4. We have alleged that the mayor cannot unilaterally stop the council from investigating the mayor's misappropriation of tax dollars. The mayor filed his answer. He disagrees with all of these claims. So I just want to be clear. This is allegations to the court. Nothing's been resolved. These are just the allegations. The council requested the court declare that the administration improperly, illegally drew warrants on the city treasury without appropriation, as I've discussed tonight. These are the laws that we think are impacted and potentially were not followed. You must have an appropriation made for the purpose of spending money, and that appropriation has not been exhausted. As you heard from Mr. Douthit, there were monies that were spent without seeking appropriation. They just went with what he called the certified budget, which again is just a fund. It's not a line item appropriation. And based on my reading of the law, it should have been the annual appropriation, which didn't include those monies. The other statute there, 364812, indicates that you can't be obligated beyond the amount of money in an appropriation. And section 13 there indicates that an individual could be held individually liable if they're found to have violated that. So, I told you there were 3 questions. Why did we revert? We reverted according to the DLGF because budget forms were not uploaded. Who was involved? Mr. Douthit told me in his deposition he's the individual at the city who always uploads the forms. And the mayor's own counsels has indicated to us that the controller did not upload those forms. And what are the implications? We only know some of the implications. That's why additional investigation is needed. I can tell you that based on my looking at budget adjustments that were made and the budgeted amounts that were approved from the DLGF, I'm still trying to account for roughly $1 million. We've asked for accountants to look at that. I'm not saying it won't be accounted for. It very well could be. I'm not an accountant. I can just tell you that the initial look showed if you add the additional appropriations made in 2022, there are budget adjustments that need to be further reviewed, and I'm asking that the council continue to review that. Our request to this council and our recommendation to this council would be to allow an accountant. You've hired Cronin Associates, who is Mr. Douthit has provided information to complete its analysis and give you a recommendation. Cronin may come back to us and say everything was spent as appropriated, and that would be wonderful news. That's what I'm hoping we find out. I'm hoping we don't find out anything else. But that's what we think needs to be done next. So I can't tell you all the implications, but I can tell you the what and the who, and I can tell you the why behind it, at least from what I think is read between the lines in those emails, which is the mayor wanted to make sure he got all the money that he sought. And if he couldn't get it all, at least get everything he sought the year before. So I'm happy to answer questions if you have them, but it's been a long night. If you would prefer to ask me questions after the meeting, I can stick around. If you prefer to have a call with me at another time to discuss things, I'm happy to be around. Thank you.
We're going to take a 15-minute, actually, excuse me, not 15.
Oh, 15 Q&A.
Oh, right, limit that. And so really what I'd like to do actually is take a 5-minute break, come back, and we'll do 10 minutes of Q&A, and then we need to move on with the agenda. Is that fine?
It's fine.
Do that. All right. Call back to order, please. Give me a couple seconds.
I mean, that's my guess.
You know, I mean, I wasn't active. you know, if that was,
Amen to that.
right. And Councilor seated, or Councilor Wells? So I think all the councilors are back. Appreciate that. If you have any questions, we can start. We can start that with Mr. Hughes currently. If you also, this was a lot to digest, so we will give an opportunity if you want to review. I know many of us have taken notes. Want to take a look and read some things. You have more than an opportunity to send those questions to Mr. Hughes, and we can get those as well. So don't feel pressured that you'll have several opportunities to decipher all of this information. I also would ask to the audience and those at home who are watching, if you have any additional questions or clarity, please feel free to reach out to your local council person or your at-large person, okay? This is your city, and we appreciate all of you guys that have been here and sitting through this. I think Councilor Chavis, or what? Oh, no, we may have a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I do.
Councilor Chavis.
Couple questions. My first question is, as part of the budget investigation, is there going to be accounting of all the monies that have been spent for ARP and submitted to the federal government via that process?
Thanks for the question, Councilor Chavis. I have, Ms. Wheeler and I have communicated with Cronin Associates, which is the accounting firm that you have retained to do that kind of work. And they're aware that that is one of the deliverables that they've been requested to do, is to go through and do the best they can to account for what's there. I will also note that it's my understanding that the city's audit is starting maybe this week of 2021 and 2022, or very, very shortly starting. And so part of that, they'll have a federal audit that'll be involved as well. I'm not exactly for sure, because we haven't been through an ARP audit yet that I've done, exactly what that'll look like. But I suspect through that process, and then also Crone is aware that that's one of the deliverables that we've requested.
Okay, and so just to follow up to that, I mean, we were made aware today that that audit was going to begin, and I would just like to publicly request that the president of the council is noticed via email on the email accounts that he typically uses regarding that audit.
That's a fair request, and I'll make sure to communicate with the mayor's team about that and make that request directly.
Thank you.
And then my other question, I have two more questions, and then I will pass it on to you, Ms. Whitfield, Councilor Whitfield. My next question is, if I'm to understand it correctly, there's been no legal fees paid outside of your monthly, okay. But I'm assuming that there's been legal fees paid for the mayors.
Well, so the council has to approve claims. So there have been claims submitted. I don't know if those claims have all been approved that have been submitted as is. I know that we attached it to a motion that we made with the court about KGR's bills. And I did not review the line item details on those bills, and I don't want to, because the mayor should be able to keep his communications with his lawyers private. But I assume that those bills are related to this matter. And as of the filing, it was over 100,000. And then I think I saw another 60,000 in the claims that were submitted tonight. So we're somewhere in the $100,000 to $200,000 range on bills to them. I'm not stating that those are all related to this matter, but I'm just assuming. I don't know.
Right. So I think we need to know what's related specifically to this matter. And I just want to say that I think it's really harsh and unfair that it's okay to pay the mayor's legal counsel, but it's not okay to pay ours. So I just want to say that, and you will get paid. You will get paid. It may not be in 2023, but you will get paid for representing this council. Thank you.
And I just want to state for the record that I have had conversations with the mayor's legal team, and I think that if we can find a path forward that's resolute, that resolves everything, I think there's a willingness to engage in that conversation. But the difficulty is we can't get to a place where we resolve everything. And so, I think the lawyers should be paid for doing the work as they do work. That's my typical advice. I think I've told members of this council that before in the past. Lawyers should get paid because we are doing work for our clients, not because, we're not the ones fighting the battle. We're doing it on your behalf. So,
Councilor Whitfield.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you both for your diligent work and bringing the information forward to the council. It is a lot of information to digest, but thank you for your diligence, working really hard at it. So one of my first questions is, can you confirm in the presentation when we started talking about the ARP fund, you showed a slide pertaining to the general fund regarding some of the public safety requests. Can you clarify and just to acknowledge that in that slide, funds are there available, line item for the requests?
Sure. So the slide I showed is your capital plan. And the capital plan, the idea in the capital plan is you try to budget for things. Some of that's through debt. So sometimes in a debt, you'll issue debt for things. Sometimes you'll do long-term leases. I don't know all of the financial structures that are involved, but your council attorney and I were just going through to find what is it in the ARP funds that are needed today. And based on our review, there wasn't an indication in the capital plan that the ARP funds were needed because there is money to make expenses. Now, what I'm not saying is that there aren't new needs. There could be. I'm not saying that it's not appropriate to upgrade fleet. Perhaps it is. I don't know those things. I'm just telling you that it's not if you don't approve this money, we don't have vehicles, because those were actually planned out in the capital plan without ARP funds. And the budget that was presented to you, at least at the time of budgeting, they were not using any ARP funds. Now, maybe the argument to that is, well, now we want to, and that's okay. I'm just telling you that what you were presented before and what you've approved before indicated that there were funds for those items. Whether that's true or not, I can't confirm because I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know what all money was spent on, but that was the budgeted plan, as I understand it.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I want to bring home is that this investigation is broad because it's related to our budget, but the focus of why we hired was why did the budget revert when we passed a budget? So I don't want to get too far in the woods that we did not hire him to justify or validate some of the things that are on our table today. He could just show you, and we could show that when it was related to the ARP fund, some of those funds were not allocated before until now, and there might be some particular correlation between the information, and that's something for us to potentially determine. Here's, I want to bring it back home to what we hired you for. Question I have: are there any prior precedent related to budget reversion due to a controller not submitting the budget? Has this ever happened in the past? And if so, what has been the remedy or what has occurred?
I can tell you that in terms of cases, we haven't found any cases that have gone up on an appellate court that decisions come out. I can tell you that I know in other communities that I've been in, when budgets revert, they're handled in all kinds of different ways. There's no uniform way that everybody handles them. But do I know of an instance where the issue was that a form was not submitted because the controller thought it didn't comply with the statute? I don't know of any other incident like that. It's possible, but I don't know of any.
Okay. So that was the question that I wanted. The other question I have is, do you know of any community when the council submits the budget, that the council the finance committee or the council as a whole provides a line item budget to the administration for submission?
So I know of an instance where when revenues were cut by a council, the council also went in and specifically cut the expenditures out of specific line items. That was this council. That is not evidence of the way that it should happen. That happened in 2016 as a result of funds coming from the utility and a pilot payment that was higher than what the council thought was appropriate. And so the money was cut, but this council wanted to adopt a balanced budget. So that was not we're adopting a budget and what I explained to the council in public at that time was, if you're cutting expenditures, you probably should also or you're cutting revenues, you probably also look at cutting expenditures. And so that was done in that way. But I don't know of communities that adopt, for example, this community doesn't attach the entire budget proposal to an ordinance. I don't know if communities do that. Typically, it's a budget preparation and then an adoption of a Form 4. That's the typical process.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councilor Chavis, you have a question, please?
I just wanted to know, so we were asking where the 3.6 million was back in October of 2021. And we ask again in 2023. And as of today, we still don't know.
What we know today is that according to Mr. Nagila, it's all over the budget. And what we know is that he indicated, he used the words impossible to identify. I will tell you that after a break, and it's not testimony, it's just conversation with council, but after a break that we had during the deposition, when we were switching from one deponent to another, one witness to another, the council, or the mayor's attorney did indicate that Mr. Douthit thought he could identify them, but if he took the time, it's just been too long. But no one's ever identified them for us yet. So that's what I know now. I cannot answer the question as to where they are, other than to tell you I was told they're all over the budget.
Okay.
But didn't Mr. Nagila also testify that some of that was for debt service?
He did. So one of the things that he testified to, and I'm still trying to get to the bottom of, was that some of those dollars that you saw were debt service, some were capital projects, and some were debt service. So we have Mr. Swint saying some of it's services. We have indications of specific projects, but then Mr. Nagila indicated he thought some of it was for debt service.
And for debt service, would you believe that if it's debt service, it's for something they've already bought?
Either something
like a
that
fire engine?
Either something you've already purchased or as part of your capital plan. A lot of times there's master lease agreements. So you do a master lease agreement at the beginning of the year and then you can borrow through the year. So typically one of those things.
And so last question, were there any negative tax implications to our constituents regarding the budget reversion?
What I would say as I sit here today is it's difficult for me to say specifically what those were. More money came into the mayor's administration or to the city. I guess I would call it the city because it comes to everybody. More came into the city, into this administration than what the council intended based on its adoption. I can tell you that. Because of the way circuit breakers work, is it possible that the taxes would have been less? Yes, it's very possible. I mean, if you're charging, for example, let's say your tax rate, I'm just going to use round numbers. If your tax rate was $2 and these impacts had a 2-cent impact, that's, now you're at $1.98 per assessed value. So it's possible. I don't know. I can't answer that question clearly. I think that the indications that Ms. Wheeler and I have is that it's likely yes, that the taxes would have been lower had your budget been adopted. I think that was the intention of the council.
Absolutely.
But I'm not going to sit up here definitively and tell you 100% I know that for sure because I'm not an accountant. But it is an allegation we've made.
Councilor Russo-Moore.
Just one second, one more clarifying response to Councilor Chavis. The other thing that makes an apples to apples comparison difficult is even with the reversion in 2022 to 2021, your assessed value in the city went up significantly. So even all things being equal, they're not equal because you're spreading it over a larger pie.
Well, so for example, the 1-year bond that we discussed last year, that's one of the things you can do to keep your tax rate levels. You can do a 1-year bond that covers because your net assessed value goes up, and if you don't adjust it, the tax rate would come down. So sometimes people will do these bonds that fill in that gap. So that's what Ms. Wheeler's talking about. So it's possible. I'm not going to say yes, that would have gone down because I don't know that for sure yet, but we're investigating it.
Councilor
Thank you, President Giles. My question is for clarification in my own mind, and maybe in the minds of the other counselors, they have this clarification. But as you stated, I believe, that the council was to understand that the reversion occurred on the May 2nd, 2021 voluntary, non-required meeting by our accountants, auditors. I'm not sure what the precise Baker Tilly presentation, which was not a public meeting. It was not fully attended by all counselors. It was not required for all counselors to attend. It was completely voluntary, and there were a couple sentences, because I was present at that meeting and I did ask many questions, and there were a couple sentences that I thought, did they misspeak on that? But I'm not an accountant, and so I put it on myself that I misunderstood. And you're telling me that's how we were supposed to be notified as a council while we're making appropriations and doing other official businesses for our good city of Lawrence with no knowledge of what budget we're operating from? Please tell me where I misunderstood that.
You are correct that that is the mayor's position. The mayor and the controller indicated in his first email to you where he discussed reversion, that it was that May 2nd meeting. And in the mayor's attorney's documents that they've submitted, that's what they've said. And at the most recent, not the most recent town hall, but the one in April, that was also the theme of the meeting, was that, or not the theme, but one of the discussions was that Baker Tilly informed you in that voluntary, non-mandatory, non-public meeting. That's correct.
In 2022.
Yeah.
In May of 2022, after the budget
Excuse
would have
me.
already reviewed.
7 months after the budget was
Right.
You are correct.
Mr. President, if I may.
Yes,
Not
please.
my position, though.
Yes, Councilor Wells, please.
Yes, I had two things of concern. Jonathan, you and I had a conversation during the break, and I just wanted to bring it out, the gist of that conversation about this Form 4, that DLGF is not weighing in on it. So as to whether it was the transfer or the reversion was done appropriately, or if our forms were done appropriately. I guess that's the whole argument as to why we had a reversion. So it goes back to what, to court? And
So I can, let me maybe try to summarize what I explained to you, Councilor Wells, which is in the letters and the communication received from the mayor's attorneys, they've indicated that they have asked that question to DLGF about the Form 4 and I don't want to say exactly what they've asked because I haven't seen the question, but I assumed the question was something like, had we submitted this document, what would have happened? Or can you submit a Form 4 without the Form 1? Something along those lines. And so Brian's saying correct. And it's my understanding they may have heard now, but as of our last conversation, DLGF, and that was in January or December or January when they asked the question. And we have not heard back from DLGF. And so they haven't heard back from DLGF. And so where we are now is we're in court. We're in court based on the mayor's decision to file it's called a petition for determination of powers is what it's called. It's before 5 judges. A petition for determination of powers also included what the mayor filed, a declaratory judgment action in which they attempted to determine that get some resolution on that issue, that the council budget wasn't accurate. So that's where we are now, and the council's filed its own counterclaim saying, no, in fact, we did do it correctly. So possible that 5-judge panel will decide it. Possible that the council and the mayor will find a path forward together in a resolution. All things are possible. But right now, it's before a judge, and DLGF has not answered that question for us.
one other thing that I wanted to ask you, because it was brought out in your presentation on these, on Station 38 that's being built new from the ground up, that these doors, they won't open without, in an event of a power failure. We had that with the old Station 38 back a long time ago, and generators wouldn't start. There was no electricity in the old part of Lawrence, mainly in my district. And back then, there was a little bit of a tragic outcome from that. So I know we're been a long night, and maybe the fire chief could explain to us that, yes, those doors will open somehow, and if this is the case that what we had put in there isn't there, do we have any recourse?
Great question. I mean, that would be a violation of the city ordinance, which you have the right to enforce. So we'd have to figure out exactly how we would enforce that financial budget, either through court action or otherwise. I want to state for the record, I'm not a contractor, not an engineer. I just know what has been told to me. It wouldn't be admissible in court for me to testify to this because it would be hearsay, but what's been explained to me is that that's correct. Those are not the doors that the council intended to be installed. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding is that.
No, you're right.
And that, Councilor Wells, I put in, because I know it's not directly related, I put in that slide because what I wanted to show to this council is what I see as a theme that is recurring since I've been here in 2005, and that is the council asks for something to be done, it does not get done, it is never communicated that it is not done, other alternatives are never presented. If it isn't a good alternative, it's never explained why, and it isn't until you find out years later that what you asked to be done wasn't done, and apparently it wasn't done because they want to continue a narrative that you want to defund the police, which is absolutely untrue. You wouldn't care about firefighters being able to get out of and respond to an emergency in the absence of power. This wouldn't have even been an issue to you if you didn't fully support first responders. It offends me to hear that narrative repeated over and over again. It offends me that repeated resolutions and ordinances of this council are ignored one way or the other. Some small, some big. That's the theme, and that's what I wanted to show you. And you all can decide for yourselves. That's just what I see. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Okay, I think that has, for the diligence of the night, to get the night going, I think that has solved that. So moving on with our agenda, want to move to the unfinished business.
I don't mean to interrupt. Do you mind if I just ask a small question?
Councilor Denny, because your name was all across
Yeah.
that thing.
I'm going to process that for a little bit.
Right.
I'm going to process that for a little bit. So I'm not asking about that, but I've heard you mention multiple times debt service and capital is what we were mostly talking about. At any point in any of this conversation, was personnel services, was any salary ever at risk or a job ever at risk in what you reviewed of any of our public servants, of any city employee during this conversation?
If you go back and review the budget hearing meeting in October of 2021, the president made a statement right before that budget meeting started where she said, it is the intention of this council that if any of the budget cuts that we're making are going to impact salaries, we're going to make that money available to you either in one-time appropriations that we'll do later or through ARP funds. There was a disagreement at that time whether or not ARP funds could be used for that purpose. Treasury had come out with guidance. I think it was right around that time, I haven't traced it back, that it could be used and it ultimately was used. So my understanding was that was never the council's intention. Your budget did cut personnel services, but as I've shown you in those emails, those cuts were related to your understanding that you were cutting unfilled positions. So the budget fully funded those positions. You were cutting monies that you didn't need to expend because you were trying to cut out the 3.6
Absolutely.
million. So the short answer to your question is this council never had any intention of doing that, and I don't think that those would have ever been at risk. That was not your intention and not what I think would have happened in the implementation of the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's move along to move the agenda forward. We're moved to the unfinished business. Could you please read the resolution by title?
Resolution number 9, 2023, introduced by Councilors Freeman and Chevlot, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Lawrence, Indiana to amend the City of Lawrence's second amended ARP fund plan.
That is still in committee. Could you also please move on to the next item? It's proposal number 7.
Proposal number 7, 2023, introduced by Councilors Freeman and Chevlot, a proposal for an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Lawrence, Indiana to appropriate from the ARP Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund in 2023 for purposes that fulfill the intent of the American Rescue Plan Act.
That is also in committee. Thank you, and we'll leave that in the Finance Committee. Thank you. Seeing no other business, meeting adjourned.